I would say everyone should probably keep a catch-all, especially if you struggle with anxiety. It's really helpful. It's really, really helpful just to put down your ideas. It's a way to be responsible. It's a way to respect your mind. I do take my ideas seriously. I'm going to write them down.
Welcome to Stoa Conversations. My name is Michael Tremblay. Today I talk with Parker Settecase. He is a public philosopher and host of the Parker Pensée podcast, as well as the YouTube channel Park Notes. We talk about writing and journaling as a method of self-discovery and a way to improve your life. Hey Parker, how you doing?
Good, man. Good to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I'm super excited to talk to you. We got the chance to talk before and it was on your show, and it was a great conversation. And I wanted to bring you on. I think because we have a lot in common. So, for those listening, you're primarily a theologian specializing in Christianity. So it's this different perspective than people that are interested in Stoicism. But I think what it has in common is this focus on, the transformative nature of studying ethics, this goal of being a good person, and engaging with these questions very seriously, as if these kinds of questions really matter, because they really matter for how we live and how we should live. So I thought we would have a really great conversation, just staying in that kind of space of philosophy of life, ethics, and how to live. In particular, though, I wanted to focus on this question of kind of journaling or practical tools that you use in terms of writing and ordering your thoughts. You could probably speak to this a bit better than I could. So, could you provide a bit of an introduction into your thoughts on the value of maybe journaling, note taking, writing, and what that's had for your life and how you think about things?
Yeah, totally, man. Yeah, I have two masters in theology, systematic theology, one in theological studies, and I have a master's in philosophy of religion. It's analytic philosophy. I was always a philosopher who was doing theology, and all my theology friends got so mad at me for being a philosopher in that space. But like you said, the philosophy side of things helped me think about a philosophy of life. Because if you know anything about modern philosophy, especially analytic philosophy, they're like, that's not philosophy any longer. We don't do philosophy of life type stuff. But the theologians, a lot of them are still messing with the old texts, and they are like, hey, Paul was talking about stoicism, so let's learn about stoicism. Or maybe John was reaching out to Stoics and Jews. And so Second Temple Judaism, stuff like that at the same time. So I started to appreciate Stoicism because of my theology, but I was always a philosopher, and I couldn't find any of my other philosopher friends who were taking it seriously unless they specialized in it like you. So it was because of the theology that I got into some of the same journaling practices that a lot of the Stoics would emphasize. And I learned, man, this is a really beneficial way of life to be like a journal person. Is as goofy as it is now, because the space is so dominated by ladies that your audience won't be able to see this, but I have a handlebar mustache, and I don't fit in the space very, very neatly, and yet, a lot of people like watching my stuff, and I think a big part of that is because I'm giving you a vision of a different kind of life, a life where your thoughts actually do matter and thinking is really important. In specifically, your thoughts do matter. They matter enough for you to spend money on a physical notebook and keep it with you at all times because you don't wanna lose those thoughts. So yeah, I think that's why I've found some success, is just that I'm kind of more of a bro. I'm not afraid to use broy type language and then slip into analytic metaphysics or, stoicism or whatever. But yeah, man, I've been doing this for about 10 years, and it's really, I wouldn't have been able to get 3 masters if I hadn't been keeping all the different styles of notebooks that I keep. And maybe I'm particular. I know there's other people like me, but I don't remember stuff as well with digital methods, as I do with the analog style.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, as you hit on, there is this theme in Stoicism of journaling, of kind of keeping a physical book on you. The handbook, Epictetus's handbook itself, was meant to be a pocketbook, right? It was meant to
Mm,
be something to keep on you. Marcus Aurelius's Meditations is something we study now, but was part of his own practice. It's something that I've personally struggled with. Like, I don't journal, And I
Mm,
always know that I should and I could probably benefit from it, but I don't. And I think maybe that's part of it is like I think enough. Like I'm like, okay, I'm already chewing on ideas. I'm already kind of all processing constantly. I'm wondering for you as someone who's also a thinker and has that philosophy background and probably someone who thinks quite a bit. What was the difference? So you've been doing this for about 10 years. Was there like a before and after when you took up that practice?
yeah.
And then a bit of maybe what that practice looked like, well, in practical terms. What does that look like in a day to day for you?
Yeah. So, beforehand, I always wanted to be a jock. I always wanted to be a wrestler. We've talked about wrestling and
Hmm.
jujitsu, and I didn't want to live the intellectual life. I thought that was for nerds. And even though I wasn't, I was a nerd myself, I didn't want to live that part of my life. So, it wasn't until college where I started taking philosophy and theology more seriously. I started reading a lot more, and I had to like teach myself how to learn or how to read. I would fall asleep on my books, I'd be drooling on them, I'd make it 2 pages and fall asleep because your mind, it reading is a it's something you have to work at, it's like jujitsu, it's like lifting weights, like, you have to practice it and you have to continue to keep it up or it's gonna slip, and I had let my mind slip a lot, especially when it came to reading. So I started reading more. Then I started having a lot more thoughts of my own. Hey, I have a unique take on this. And turned out to not be that unique because I just needed to read more and see that a lot of people had thought about the things I was thinking about. But having like a unique insight, that's really cool. That's really like important. That's the life of the mind is a really rich part of what it means to be human. It's not everything,
Mm,
but being creative even in your intellectual work, like that's a really big deal. And a lot of people don't think about it like that. They think like the nerds are they're just logic choppers. They're just like it's just mathematics in there. And then you like study the history of mathematics and you're like, "Oh, there's so much creativity that goes on in this." And like, creativity is such a deep part of thinking. Like it just is all blended up together. So I would have these like brainstorms, these mind storms when I was laying in bed because all these thoughts would come rushing back and I didn't want to forget them. And I don't know if that was intentional or if that was my mind, fighting against me. But I would lay in bed for 2 hours just thinking about all the ideas that I was chewing on throughout the day. And I would work through different ideas, different blog post ideas, stuff like that. And I'd wake up and they were gone. I was like, dude, what? I could get them back if I focused on them. But I'm like, I had these unique insights. And even if they weren't unique in human history, they were unique in my history. And I just lost them. And I can get them back if I really work at it. But I came up with this really cool phrase or I came up with this really good argument. I don't know if I can say it the same way. So I just randomly started with a moleskin pocket notebook and I got a leather cover to it because I thought, "Hey, it looks cool." That was it. It was just like it looks like it should be wrapped in a leather thing. Some people don't like that, but that's like part of it. It feels like it's an ancient tradition, having a leather notebook. So I started keeping a pocket notebook with me, and then when I was going to bed, I could actually all those ideas that would come like rushing back to me, I'd just write them down, and then I could actually fall asleep. So for the first time in I don't know, a year and a half, 2 years, I wasn't laying in bed for 2 hours, just, like, plagued by these ideas that I thought were original. I could actually write them down and remember in the morning, so that was a huge, that was actually impactful for my life?
yeah, there's a lot of great stuff there. I mean, I was thinking there was one thing you said about, the life of the mind isn't valued or whatever way you put it. And yeah, I think about something like, if you work all day and you dig something or you build a wall, you walk away, that wall is still there. And if
Mhm.
that wall got knocked down, it would be incredibly frustrating, or at least everybody recognized what a waste of time. You built this wall and it got knocked down. There's nothing there. But I think that you speak to that as like we sit and we think and we ruminate on things, but then we don't capture that value. And maybe it's not the best wall. Maybe you're going to knock the wall down later and build
Yeah.
another one because you're learning how to build, you're getting better at your craft, but you still want to kind of preserve the output of that work. And that's something that we don't do because we don't care about that as much. And I think about how many people have Instagram pages. I have Instagram, and not saying it's a bad thing, but we preserve our kind of visual representations of ourselves or kind of our status or our appearance, but we don't preserve those thoughts in the same way or show them off, at least not as commonly. So yeah, I think that does say something about how things are valued. I think there's that which is just great. I think that's a really great point that speaks to I think myself too is like it's something I probably should do is write more things down. Another point you spoke to, which comes back to I remember this from our last conversation, just to focus on humility. It's really easy to think what you have is a great idea if you keep it in your head. If you
Mhm.
commit it to paper,
Yeah.
it's a lot. You're gonna. It's kind of a trial by fire because you've put it out into the world, and other people. I mean, either if it's for yourself, you can return to it, but if you put it up somewhere publicly, other people can see it, and you've committed to it, right? It's not this.
Mhm.
It's not this thing I'm chewing on. It's like that's my thought. That's the sentence.
Yeah.
That's my way of putting it, and now you've committed to it, and the kind of holes to it come out. Not really adding anything there to that, just those are things that you said that really resonated with me and spoke to me. The third thing, sorry, just riffing on what you were saying because I thought it was so
Yeah.
interesting.
No, it's good.
This is one thing that I do too is like the only kind of journalism I do is like notes on my phone. I should probably get a notebook
Mm.
because when I'm sitting in bed and I have trouble falling asleep, I find if I just like write what I'm thinking about down, it does really help. There is
Yeah.
really something to that about also freeing up, I guess, your mental space by getting it out of that loop. That's really important too. So I don't know if you wanted to respond to any of that, but also curious about how, okay, that's why the habit started. Um, what does that look like? How did that transform? Is that just something you've been doing consistently? Have you changed your practice in any way?
Yeah. So I'll get to the changing, but dude, you had some good insights there too. So, yeah, the humility part. One, if you have to write down what you think, a lot of times it's different than what you think you think. Like you have a vague idea, right? You have this vague notion of X, Y, and Z, and then you have to write it down. And you're like, maybe I just don't even know enough
Yeah,
to
yeah,
say what I think I'm trying to say, and you end up changing your opinion, and that happens if you're writing an academic paper. I had one where I had to completely change because I realized what was actually going on and I was like, "Oh, no, you know what? I'm gonna argue against this." And I completely changed the paper because of it. And it was so helpful for me to have to be forced to put my vague ideas into words and clarify what I mean. So sometimes it's just clarifying. Other times it's not humiliating, but it's humbling to see, "Oh, that's what I think," or "That's the best I can do." Well, maybe I
yeah.
should work on this a little bit. You know, maybe
Yeah.
maybe it's time to work on it. This is genuinely my best shot, and I don't think it's that good. That's okay. It's a start.
Well,
And
because
then,
if I can,
yeah, go ahead.
sorry to take that up. Well, I mean, we both do Brazilian jiu-jitsu. People listening, they're gonna really resonate with this jiu-jitsu stuff if they do it, and maybe a bit less so if you don't. But the one of the main appeals to Brazilian jiu-jitsu has always been like, and wrestling is the same way, or any kind of uh, fighting focused martial art, is that you get um, consistent feedback on your aptitude from a resisting partner. So you're not able to exist in this land of, well, I think my technique works. It either does or it doesn't, and you get feedback on it immediately, right? And that kind of iterative, consistent feedback is really valuable. And so that's what I'm hearing you to say is there's this, it can be really tempting with ideas to keep it in this. It's like the person who's like, "Oh, I've got like, the best takedown or I've got this submission will work on anybody, but I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to practice it." It's a disservice to yourself as a martial artist to be like that. You've got to go to the room, you got to try it. And I think obviously there's journaling and then there's like blogging, right? And I think maybe there's this analogy to blogging, which is actually putting your ideas out there into the world. But I think there's that space where you can almost do it to yourself.
Mhm.
Sorry, bear with me on this, but it's not like you're fighting against an opponent, but you're like fighting from against yourself a day ago. You go back and you read it and you say, "Oh, that wasn't that compelling," or "Oh, that wasn't that good," because now it's written down. You can actually reflect on it, and you can kind of have that relationship.
That makes total sense, and not only can you just reflect on it, you can sharpen it. You're like,
Yeah.
just because you had the thought then doesn't mean it's complete, and I think we have a weird view about that too, because we don't understand authorship and how authors write books. We think that so often it's like a spark of, ingenuity. It just hits you, and I have the inspiration, and the muse comes and drags me along. It's like, if you talk to authors, nonfiction author or fiction authors, it's not like that. Like,
Mhm.
they work at it. It's a lot of work, and they got better at it because of it. So, yeah, man, write down your ideas and then come back and this was the analytic philosopher in me, come back and shred them or just come back and build them up, Build them, retouch on that. I've done this so much. All of my YouTube videos have been in multiple journals, notebooks, and they've spanned years, some of them, where I've just been chewing on this idea forever. And then when I go to actually make it, maybe I put 3 or 4 different ideas together, and I'm like, "Man, good thing I did this because if I hadn't been working on this for 3 years, I couldn't have done it." Like, I wouldn't people some I have a lot of YouTube channels and a blog and stuff, And a lot of people will say, "Hey, you must be so busy." And I'm like, "Well, I'm a little busy, but I've also been working at this for 10 years. I've been collecting my thoughts for 10 years. Like, they're not all good. They're definitely not. But I've been sharpening and chewing on them for a very long time because I think they matter. They matter to me. I don't think everyone wants to read through my journals, but they're tools for me. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think it's beautiful. I mean, we'll get into some more about the practice, but at at the heart of a philosophy of a way of life, I always think it's this idea that like how you live matters. And I
Mhm.
always go back to this Socratic idea of like an unexamined life is not worth living. And when people say, well, are you a stoic? Or it's like, I honestly don't care what you do, which is like, you should take these questions seriously. And so what I'm hearing from you is that same thing. It's like what you think matters. The light, like that you have this well of creativity. You have this well of ideas that you're generating. And don't I don't know, don't underestimate yourself, don't lose that, don't, take that as less important than other kinds of things you produce. Capture those, and then not only will they be better, but you're also just like we're kind of just generating those as we go anyway. We all have thoughts and reflections. And I just think that's a beautiful sentiment, and that's something that I'll reflect on. We're 15 minutes in. I'm going to have that as a takeaway of like, yeah, it matters what you think. It doesn't just matter when you're having the debate or you're having the conversation. It matters what you think when you're going on a walk or you're sitting by yourself too. And there's something beautiful to that.
Yeah. Well, and we all do this. A lot of people do this in the shower. I wish I would have said this instead of that.
Mhm.
Well, actually writing stuff down does help you remember. There's some psychological literature on that. A lot of it has to do with taking notes in class versus taking notes on your laptop, and partially that's because, or at least the interpretation is that you can take notes faster on a keyboard, and so you might be able to take down, like, verbatim, word for word, what the professor's saying, but if you write with in longhand, then you can't write as much, so you have to digest it as they're talking. You have to put it in your own words. So that's part of it, but I think there's more to it. I think that, like, the hand brain connection, whatever, I think there's something really strong there that when you're writing it down, you actually remember it. So Field Notes, one of their mottos is, "I'm writing it down, to remember it now." So it's not just I'm writing it down to remember it later. I'm writing it down to remember it now
Hmm.
because the act of writing that down helps you remember it. I Same thing with my books. I make marginalia. I write in all my books. Some people hate that because they have this, like, a holy vision of books. I think books are tools, and so I wanna make it my own. This is my copy of this book. Why I wanna go back to it. I wanna reference it, man. If I'm gonna have you back on, I don't wanna go back to Seneca and be like, "Where did he say that?" No, no, I marked it up, dude. I can read through this so I can not so I can look smart. I did that work. Like, that's my work. Why would I let that pass? Why would I just read it passively and not be able to use it later? Um, so if you don't have a podcast, you don't have a blog, it's still the same thing. Don't you want to digest what you're reading and make it part of who you are? So yeah, we can get into the different methods. Commonplace books do that a little bit differently, and but I keep different journals and different notebooks for different purposes, all having to do with the life of the mind, but they serve different roles.
I want to get into those purposes, but I want to follow up on that thing that you just said about I'm going to remember it now. That's another great one because it makes me think about Marcus Aurelius's meditations, right? And he's writing this journal to himself, not intended for public audience. Um, and one thing that we talk about in Stoicism, I mean, I wrote paper on this is this concept of digestion and Epictetus.
Mm,
So this idea of you've taken in the principles, but you need to digest them. And Epictetus uses this actual physical metaphor, which is that you know it needs to transform into muscle, right? Like it needs to the work that you did eating needs to manifest different and to change kind of the base material you're working with. And so Marcus Aurelius is not taking notes from a lecture. He's just re-articulating things he's already learned, he's already read, he's already thought about, but it's having a kind of a morally transformative function. Because I think we're talking a bit about, and I don't think these things are mutually exclusive, but we're talking about almost about productivity, right? Like you're doing that work, you had that good thought, don't lose it, so you can have that good blog post, or you can kind of produce, or you can, be have an intelligent point to raise in conversation later. There's this kind of idea of like, don't lose work. You
mm,
already did the work, record it so you can keep it. But then there's that second point of actually that transformative aspect of writing, which is not just I want this to be I don't wanna lose something I had that was already good at it. I want to become better by doing this. Um, and I guess I'm curious, I mean, when you talk about different journals for different purposes, for different ways of writing for different purposes, is there one that kind of fulfills that function more than others? Or I guess maybe how do you think about it?
Yeah, yeah, 100%. Um, sometimes or a lot of people talk about imposter syndrome, especially in academia. I think this is all speculation, man. I haven't done any research on it, but I think a lot of that has to do with the nature of academia being, I'm gonna pour everything into my head. I'm gonna write this paper, and then it's on to the next different topic, maybe a related topic, but I'm not looking at those things anymore. And so if someone asked you, "Hey, can you help me think through this paper?" You may have to go read that paper again, or you may feel like an imposter. I don't really own those concepts that I wrote about.
Yeah.
I think that's a big part of it because you look, it's still your work for sure. You did the research. You don't have to feel bad about it. But if it's not part of who you are, then I understand why you're a little bit nervous to talk about that. And human memory is weird, and we forget weird stuff, and we remember weird stuff, and you'd be surprised what you do and do not remember. But when you make it part of who you are, you're like becoming the expert in that field, having a little humility, being like, "Hey, I forgot," or whatever, "I'm not sure." But also like, "No, I know this stuff because I read it. This is like part of who I am." I not only have read it, but I've tried to apply it to my life, and I've tried to help other people understand this. So, I think actually practicing the good wisdom, the good lessons, the good concepts that you've learned, practicing those and making them part of who you are, reflecting on them, but also reflecting on them and then going out into the world trying to act on those,
Hmm.
making you that type of person, I think that can help with that imposter syndrome. Like, no, these are lessons that belong to me because I have earned them. I've done the hard work of reading about them. I've also just incorporated them into my life. I've become this type of person.
I mean, as Epictetus would say, I'm a big Epictetus guy, so
Mhm.
as Epictetus would say, "Show me your muscles, don't show me your weights,"
Mm,
right? Which is like, show me, as you said, it's become a part of you, not the book that you have on the shelf that you read once, but
right.
show me that part of that when you read that book, what part of that became a part of you, and show me that and how
Yeah.
that acts and how you manifest it.
Yeah. So you asked about, do I have like a different journal for that? So one of my journals, I call it a book of soliloquies, and I got this from Saint Augustine. I know that soliloquy has come to mean something a little bit different in theater. It's just like someone speaking out loud or speaking to themselves. But a philosophical soliloquy, at least from Saint Augustine, is when you personify your own thought process. So you're having a dialogue with yourself. So Saint Augustine does this in his book of, there's two soliloquies, one and two, I think. And I think he's talking with Lady Reason, and he's going back and forth. Hey, why do I believe this? Why do I believe that? It's still him. It's all him. But then Boethius does this in the Constellation of Philosophy. He's talking with Lady Philosophy, and it's his thoughts, but he's going back and forth. And both of those thinkers are writing for other people, but it's still like their own thoughts. They're still getting clear on what they believe. Boethius was writing in prison, so I don't know that he's like well aware that this is going to be published and
Mhm.
that lots and lots and lots of people are going to read it. He had plenty of other works that he meant for that. And Augustine is like, look, I want to know about God and the soul. And Reason's like, anything else? And he's like, nothing more, nothing whatsoever. And it's not clear whether or not that was like meant for publication or that was his own personal thing. But I've taken that and I reason with myself. Sometimes I personify my own thoughts. Sometimes it's just me kind of same, me versus me. But I use this to try and get clear on reoccurring themes in my life. So, particular one is like, dude, I really like villains, and I'm like, why? Why do I like villains so much? What's the deal? How come villains are so much more compelling to me? I don't know that I want them to win, but growing up, dude, I wanted to be Gaston from Beauty and the Beast, and I'm like, no one hunts like Gaston. No one fights like, yeah, he's a jerk. He can like he can work on himself a little bit, but that dude's the freaking man. What's going on? He from his perspective, this woman that he liked that snubbed him, so made him like her even more. got abducted by some beastie thing, and he's like, "I'm gonna go kill that." So, maybe that I just totally lost someone, especially if it's a young lady listening who's like, "No, Belle is me." Like, yeah, maybe but I understand that that's something that's odd about myself, so let me go think through that. Let me take some time to actually think through, is there something wrong with me, or is it because maybe we're better at, painting compelling pictures, and Gaston's not the best, but, like, Emperor Palpatine or whoever, like, um, pick your poison there, Moriarty from Sherlock Holmes, like, why do I like these people? Why am I don't even know if I like, because I don't wanna emulate them necessarily, except for Gaston, but, they're just more compelling than some of the protagonists. So, I think about this one a lot. I often write in my soliloquies book, like, here's a villain that I'm attracted to. What is it about them, and what are some positive aspects? Like, are these positive attributes that are just gone amok? Can I respin them the other way? Or, yeah, maybe there's something just kinda twisted about me. That's something I'd rather work through in a notebook than with my spouse, you know?
Yeah, so the idea is it's a form of a dialogue with yourself,
Yeah,
and you either personify the other side, or it's, as you said, just you against you. And now you're using it, the moral aspect there was you're using it as like a form of self discovery, right?
yeah,
Is like, I have this part about myself that's either confusing. I mean, I don't know if this one's particularly shameful, but it's, at least it's confusing. And this is going to help me kind of dig it out, because I'm going to be able to put a name on it. This is this how it works? Like, this is villain loving Parker, and he's going to provide the counter
yeah.
arguments to all the reasons why you shouldn't. Yeah, cool. I mean, so this is something that I do myself, but I don't write it down. One thing, I think there's a value to that. I find I do this process, the soliloquy process, a lot when I'm having an argument with another person, and I almost try to like epitomize them and put them as charitable as possible. So
Mhm.
when I think, "Oh, no, they're wrong," and then I think, "Well, their argument would be this," and then I go, "Okay," and then I kind of go back and forth, and it helps me kind of become much more empathetic. It's like a dialogue without the other person there, which is a funny way of saying it, but I do find it really,
Mhm.
really helpful
Yeah.
internally. But you're saying you write this down, and that process helps it even more.
100%, and yeah, you may write that down, that exactly the way you just described it, where you're personifying the other person, but you're putting them in the best light possible.
Yeah.
I don't wanna say steel manning, because that's such a cliche thing now, but it is, like, it's giving their that's what analytic philosophy is all about. It's like, I'm gonna knock down your argument, but I'm gonna make it way stronger if I can, and then I'm gonna destroy the best version of it. But doing this for self-exploration, for, examining your life, and just like you said earlier about writing down your ideas to get clear on them, writing down, these are still your ideas, they're still your thoughts. I don't wanna make a super huge, like, distinction between thoughts and emotions or anything like that, but writing these down, there's also something final about it. So if it's just going on in my head, I could have the same thought again and again and again and again. But there's something about, um, offloading those
Mm,
thoughts into a notebook that has some kind of finality where you're like, I've worked through that. And if it comes back up, let me go back and read what I was thinking about then. Oh, you know what? Maybe I have changed a little bit. Let me do this again. Or maybe I'll move this into a journal and do it a little bit differently. Or maybe I can go talk to my therapist about this because I've done some work. Why is the work only in my actual therapy session? Like, that's like, you don't do your homework at home and you just show up to class expecting that's when you're gonna learn. So I don't personally go to therapy, but I'm saying, like, this could be a really helpful tool
mhm.
for those who do as well.
The other thing this makes me think of, this Hannah Arendt is like, I I just like, just calling out the far reference, but I'll loop it back. Hannah
Mm,
Arendt talks about in Eichmann in Jerusalem, the banality of evil. And the idea there, I don't know if you've read that book, but the idea there is
no,
that evil is not this kind of creative genius. Evil is actually a lacking. It's a lacking of thinking. It's banal. It's the inability to think that causes us to do evil things, not some sort of creativity.
yeah,
Um, and Hannah Arendt talks about the political. This is a very influential argument for me. The political is about unification. So in order to act, you need to have one position that you're going to do. And then thinking and the philosophical is about actually division. It's about splitting apart.
mm,
And that's why the kind of Socratic dialogue is like the start of philosophy, is it's like the splitting apart of options, as opposed to, I'm going to tell you what to do. This is the right answer. And then this also has this parallel between art and propaganda. Art is about ambiguity, potentiality. Propaganda is about this is the good guy, this is the bad guy, this is how you should live. And so I think about that with the soliloquy is like if you want to think, divide yourself. That's real thinking. Otherwise, you might just be kind of working yourself up into kind of telling yourself what you want to hear, you falling back into a similar thought pattern. It's like you can't get real thinking without division. And to kind of make that an exercise, I think is such a smart way to pull out, yeah, real genuine thinking. If you're giving the other side as strong a view as possible and you're giving yourself as strong a view as possible, now you're really going to come to something new and novel.
Yeah. No, I think that's great, and it's another tool, right? It's not everything. I don't only do these.
Hmm.
I do this along with other things, and based on the amount of notebooks that I keep or the number of notebooks I keep, people will think I'm only notebooking all the time. I have 3 maybe staple notebooks, and then the others I use when the appropriate time comes up. These are tools.
Hmm.
They don't rule my life. These help me live my life well. And so, yeah, like pulling them out, someone said something to you and it really, really messed with you. Like, why? Why was it that thing? Okay, let's do a soliloquy about that. And if you do come to a conclusion, maybe you don't have to every time, but let's say you do and you get down to the heart of it and you think, this is why I think I was so upset at my dad for saying that. Okay, now you can actually like journal in the classical sense about that or keep it in your diary or something like that, or bring that up to them and they say, "Well, I didn't mean that." And you say, "Okay, but you're working through, you're
Hmm.
putting your emotions and your thoughts down on paper." And yeah, it has some finality to it, which is really fun. Yeah, making progress.
Yeah. And so, what are some of the other examples of the notebooks that you keep around, or some of your other practices?
Yeah, so I do have my staple is a catch-all. The audience
Hmm.
can't see it, but I always have a catch-all with me. This is like, man, if I have good ideas for a science fiction story that I'm writing, I just pick that back up. I will write that in here. To-do lists go in here. This is like my working memory, and it really helps me not have to ruminate on the things I need to remember. Someone tells me something important that's actionable, okay, I'm gonna put that in here, and, I'm gonna go back through that at the end of the day and put those all in the right kinda place. So this is the first step, the first stop, and then the ideas move into the other types of notebooks. So I have, so say I have a good science fiction story idea, I will put that in my science fiction notebook. I write most of my stories in here, at least like the points I wanna hit, and then I will read from that when I'm actually typing up. If it's, if it's like a podcast idea, a question that I have for one of my podcast guests, I'm gonna put that in a different notebook and probably a specific page for that thinker. Here are the questions that I have. Because if you have to come up with all the questions in 1 hour before your guest shows up, they won't be as good as if you've been ruminating on that since the time you scheduled that
Hmm.
episode. So I have one for my podcast, one for science fiction. I'm going to sound pretty manic and crazy here because I
You got
keep
a
so
lot of
many.
energy, a lot,
Yeah,
a lot of time.
but it's because, well, it's because I keep this one on me.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
can move them from my catch-all whenever I do end up having time. I have a lot of projects going on. Not everyone's going to have that. Maybe you only have like 3 or 4 things in your life. You got your kids, you got your job, you got your spouse, and then a couple hobbies. You're gonna have ideas about all that. You want a new, kayak because you're a kayak fisherman. Well, you're gonna ruminate on that. "Oh, I really want this one. Oh, well, but this one's got different specs." Just write it down, and now it's offloaded. It's not outmoded. You don't have to not think about it anymore, but you've made some progress, and you said, "Oh, I actually like this spec better, so I'm gonna just edit it," edit your thing. So I've found that it really helps me not be anxious because 'cause I'm not keeping all these loose threads going at
Hmm.
once. I put them down. I can feel okay not thinking about that right now because I put it somewhere. I've been responsible with that actionable idea. So I always keep a catch-all with me, and I usually keep a some sort of commonplace book with me with quotes that I do wanna ruminate on, that I wanna put in here to chew on, and that I wanna put in here to act on.
So we got the soliloquy and the catch-all.
Mhm.
I'm still trying to make this like mental model of these because I think it's not a way I've heard this talked about before.
Mm,
but you seem to have like a really great model about it. What I'm thinking about with the catch-all is I think about a lot about stoicism, both ethically and in all aspects of your life. It's about attention. It's about the proper application of attention and mindfulness. And that's something that, we talk a lot about on this channel. And so what I'm hearing from this is I'm hearing about it's a way to kind of actually free up attention, or
yeah,
at least one aspect of this. It's a way to free up attention by, offloading this into your catch-all. And then you not only will you end the day with a better set of ideas than if you tried to hold on to it, but then each new thing situation you encounter, you'll encounter more mindfully and more present because you're not thinking about your kayak. You're
that's right.
not thinking about the task the person gave you an hour ago that you're trying
Yeah.
to not lose track of. Is that am I onto something there? Is that something you
I
experience?
Yeah, I think you're totally onto it, and actually, I have a example right here. So I have this notebook. This is just for you, Michael. But um, I have this notebook. I'm keeping notes that I want to talk about with you right now. So something
Mhm,
comes up, and instead of interrupting you because I don't want to forget it, I'm tempted to interrupt you to help the conversation move along or to agree with you, or I'm trying to help, but I've learned you can't just interrupt people, especially when you're not in person as much. There's different social cues. So if I write it down, then I know, hey, it's there. I can look back at this. I can just glance down and glance back up at you, but I can actually be more present with you
mhm,
because I'm not worried about saying that point that I wanted to make or that good phrase that just popped in my head. I can just make a note to myself and be more present. So I think what you said does resonate. Like that is the main reason that I'm using notebooks and so many of them is so I can be, oh, I want to be a better thinker and stuff like that too. But I want to be present. I want the thoughts to help me live well and not get in the way.
mhm. Yeah, it's inspiring. I wanna get this down because I think there's such a practical value to going through these, even though I think I could deep
Totally.
dive into a single one. So,
Yeah.
soliloquy seems to me like a more intensive practice. You got really something
Right.
you're chewing on.
Mhm.
Maybe it doesn't have to be an intense topic, but it's like, it's a focused exercise. Catch-all is something you carry around with you, and then you offload what you have in the catch-alls into these are your notebooks, these are journals. What do you call the things that
Um,
you
well, so they're notebooks because I think I have a specific understanding of journal and diary and I've
Mhm,
been thinking about these for a little bit. So they're all notebooks, and these are different ways of using a notebook. So yeah, I'll offload them into the different notebooks that I have. So sometimes it's a let's say I have an idea for a soliloquy that I want to do on a Saturday morning when I have some time over coffee. Okay, I'll just make a note of that. Hey, think about this soliloquy, circle it, and then maybe later you even schedule it into your calendar and you block off some time like you're in a meeting. I'm in a meeting right then. Hey, you have any time to do this? If it's, not something like with your family or something, sorry, I'm in a meeting. And it's a meeting with me. You don't have to
mhm.
tell them that. But it is important. If it's important to think through and examine your life and get clear on what you're feeling and thinking, then it's important enough to schedule into your calendar.
And I think that's great. And so what's that model of a diary and a journal? I think I would use those interchangeably. So
Yeah, a lot of people do. Yeah, I used to
how do you
too.
view those?
I think I started not v I think I started making a distinction because I thought diaries were for girls, and I was trying to be a macho man,
Like
you know?
I have a journal, okay?
That's
Like
right,
this is
that's
my
right.
leather journal.
That's right, that's right. I'm gonna put it in my leather, satchel, and it's not a purse either, so shut up. Um, well, so that is just genuinely speaking, that's why I started it, but then I found that other people, also made some distinctions. Cal Newport will make distinctions like this. And it's just helpful if we clarify what we mean. So if you're just making it up on your own, you can do that. You can just stipulate this is what I mean. But also, it helps if you find other people doing this practice as well. So I think a diary is a time bound collection of your emotions. However you want to say it, your emotions, your feelings. This is what I'm feeling today. Here's what happened to me, and here's how it made me feel. Here's what I was experiencing. It's a collection of time-bound emotions for you to go back and see what you were thinking when, right? So I can look back from a diary, and usually these are kept daily or weekly, some kind of time component, mostly daily. So that's what a diary is going to be, but you're not going to see a whole ton of. interplay with yourself. It's not like a soliloquy where you're, why did I feel like that? Here's what Steve said to me, and here's what it made me feel. Okay, why did it make you feel like that? You don't see that a lot with diary. Diary is like, today this happened to me, and then this, it's a log of what is happening to you, and you'll often say, I was mad about it or something like that. But it's for you to look back and see your progress or see what you were feeling and what day. And so that's how I define diary. And it's not just me making it up. I found other people who also make this distinction. A journal, on the other hand, is a collection of your ideas. So it doesn't have to be time bound. It could be whenever. I always put a date because I do want to know when this idea started, or see the progress myself. But these are about your thoughts. These aren't necessarily like, here's what happened today and here's how it made me feel. It's maybe like, here's I'm synthesizing two ideas between Marcus Aurelius and Seneca. And so here's this idea that I have. You can write the whole thing without saying, and it made me feel sad or made me feel happy, to, you know what I'm saying? So the distinction between emotions and thoughts, I think, track the distinction between journals and diaries. I know. What do you think about that?
Okay, so yeah, so in consulting, so I work as a consultant. In consulting, we have this thing called design thinking, and it's this basically it's this way of creative problem solving. The first stage of design thinking is discovery, which is like non-judgmentally taking in as much information as possible and
Mm,
describing it. And then the next phase is definition or synthesis,
mm,
and it's often used in this kind of diamond model. So the diamond opens up as you accept more information in, and then it closes down as you get to the root of it. And I think that's a really valuable distinction between diary and journal. And what I'm hearing is the diary is non-judgmental, descriptive. It's that kind of discovery phase.
yeah.
What do I think? And for me, as someone who is like, that might sound if you're listening to the podcast, you're interested in philosophy, that might sound less interesting than the journal. So who cares if you felt mad or sad? What matters is, how can you combine that with what Epictetus thinks? How can you bounce that off, what Plato thought? That's the journal. It's that kind of synthesis part, the sentence you want to stand behind. But I also think the diary seems to me, we all have areas of self-knowledge which is rather poor, or a capacity to not be very to not always be sensitive or mindful of the things that are popping up and flowing through us. And so I see that diary as that practice of just identification. Like if you can even just get to the point was today was a bad day and I recognize that it was a bad day. I'm not going to pretend it wasn't. I'm not going to over conceptualize this. I just felt sad today. I think that is like that's a hugely helpful stage in self development because you understand what you're working with. So that's to me how I see that distinction.
Yeah, totally. I think that that terminology is really, really tracks well. And just think about it. So you say maybe you have a self conception that you're a happy person. You start keeping a diary and you see, hey, for the past 8 months, I've been not a happy person, or not a kind. Maybe I think I'm kind. And actually, like, if you're being honest with yourself, I yelled at him, I yelled at him, I yelled at her. I'm like, as insofar as you're being honest with yourself, and why wouldn't you be? Because no one else is reading over your shoulder. You need to get over that. A lot of us think, well, I'm writing this as if someone's reading it. They're not. Don't do that. Just be honest. And I think that discovery is really helpful. I like that terminology. So I used to keep more of a diary. I don't keep diaries anymore. Um, it was more of a prayer journal. I'm praying. I'm just going to mark down what I've been praying for. It's the same thing. Like, if I think I'm really selfless and I keep praying for myself all the time and never anyone else, I don't know, man. Maybe it may say something about your relation to God or how you think about God. It also could say something about you. Like, maybe you are less selfless and more selfish than you think.
Yeah.
So I think it is a good, yeah, it's a log. It's time bound because it shows like a period of time. Hey, here's what happened in this chunk of time. And a journal's different. A journal is for your ideas, and ideas are connected to your emotions, and how you think will shape how you feel and vice versa, but they can be separated. And we do this all the time because you write papers on stoicism, and often you're not including your emotions on those texts.
Mhm. And then by this definition, I would think of Marcus Aurelius' meditations as more of as a journal, not as a diary,
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
a synthesis of ideas, as you said, informed by what he's feeling, informed by his personal circumstances, but
Yeah.
an articulation of ideas. And that's really what he uses it for, right? Like a lot of the times he smashes these things together.
And
Um,
the synthesis is important. I think the synthesis is what makes it a journal. So I have a dianoia journal, which it just means like thinking through. It's like discursive thought, and that's where I'm doing more analytic philosophy type stuff. Here's a premise. Now I'm going to either defend it or destroy it. And so I'm thinking through it. I'm showing a record of my discursive thought, and that is going to be different. So I think I agree with you that Marcus is more of a journal, but things like a bullet journal, I think should probably be called a bullet diary because it's literally a time-bound daily thing. You're collecting what you do and what you have done. You're collecting how you felt about those types of things, and so I think it's more rightly called a bullet diary, but, whatever, man. I'm not in charge of branding for that.
yeah, no, fair enough. And so you've mentioned commonplace book
Mhm.
and a compendium. What are those, and how do they fit into your writing practice?
Yeah, so maybe I'll lean on you here for Epictetus's handbook. I I think a compendium was probably gonna be like that. It's probably gonna be it's an abstraction of ideas. So like a classic compendium would be like a field guidebook for turtles or North American birds or something. You're not collecting quotes from the other books that you've read in order to describe these birds. Maybe you cite footnotes or something like that, or endnotes probably in something like that, but you're just what's the turtle? What turtles live in North America? Okay, here's a list of them. Here's the information about them. I've collected it. It's supposed to be comprehensive and it should be probably systematic so that you can actually look up what you need to do. Now these are for us, so they may be less systematic. They may be more ad hoc. You just are adding to it what you need. I've always had a problem with like systematic or systematizing my stuff because I have it going one way in my head, and then when I end up writing it, I need to switch things around. But, um, maybe you make yourself like a handbook for life. "Hey, this is a type of person I wanna be." You've read some stuff, you've thought about it a lot. Now give yourself bullet notes or give
Mm.
yourself pages. "Hey, this is the kind of man I wanna be. This is the kind of father that I wanna be. This is something I wanna strive toward." So it's like making your own personal handbook. I also have compendiums where it's just abstracted out information for different topics that I'm gonna speak on or that I think about a lot often. So, like, I have a simulation hypothesis compendium because all the college athletes I work with, they always ask me about simulation hypothesis, and I've read some stuff on it. I wanna have that information on hand, and, I don't necessarily need to have all the quotes for it. I just need the facts. You might do this with, like, different views on theoretical physics or whatever. You're making yourself a compendium to help you understand and help you remember the concepts. A commonplace book is a collection of quotes, and I actually have 4 different ways that I keep those. I don't know if you wanna get into that or not.
Yeah, let's do it. Break it down.
Yeah, okay, well, I've been keeping commonplace books almost as long as I've been keeping pocket notebooks, and this was just a practice I started on my own. I was reading a lot of great books, and in order to go back and think about that really good quote that I just read, I'd have to go pick up the book, like, from my shelf, and it just seemed like it was easier to put them all in one spot, and I was doing some public speaking, and I thought, wouldn't it be nice to have all these quotes in one spot so I can pull from them and put them in my speeches? That'd be great. So, I didn't find out until later that this is, like, a long tradition, and the word commonplaces goes all the way back to Aristotle. Aristotle meant more of a compendium. He's making a common place for syllogisms and different forms of argument. And then actually, Seneca started adding to them and adding quotes. And so some of the Roman rhetoricians actually were changing the way that commonplaces were thought of. And they had more, they had the modern notion of commonplace book more in mind. And then Boethius was like, "No, no, this is not true to Aristotle. He's the great interpreter of Aristotle." So he tried to parrot back, but it was too late. So I think it's fine. Just call what Aristotle was doing, call it a compendium. It's just a guidebook, a handbook of syllogisms and different, Barbara and Celerant, different ways to argue. And the other things are commonplace. It makes more sense. It's a commonplace for quotes. So first up, okay, there's two things that can determine what kind of commonplace book you're going to have. Um, one is the scope, and the other is whether or not you're adding your own thoughts to it. So the scope, if you have just a general commonplace book, that's just you're reading books and you like the quote, you put it all in one notebook. So you could have fiction, nonfiction, whatever. It's fine. It's just this is my commonplace book. I think as you do that, you might end up getting frustrated because you're like, these don't fit together and I need to get in the right headspace. So then you start making topic specific commonplace books. So I have a philosophy of mind commonplace book. That's the topic is philosophy of mind. I want to be an expert in philosophy of mind. And so I take all the good quotes that I need to know as an expert of philosophy of mind. I put it in one spot and I don't add in my own notes in there. That's just for me to read and ruminate on and reflect on, to memorize, to chew on, to get in the right headspace. That's what that notebook is for. And then I have a manuscript commonplace book that is, I used to do this for all my graduate papers. I didn't want to just write the paper and then be done with it. I wanted that to be my paper. I wanted to be able to talk about it. So I would actually manuscript them out in a commonplace book. And that meant I would write out the quotes that I was going to use. And then I would do arrows and, all sorts of things. Here's how I'm using it. I'm going to argue against it. So I'm adding my own thoughts and making it a little bit more like a journal than just a straight up commonplace book. And these aren't just artificial distinctions. I did a deep dive into the history of commonplace books and realized that this was a distinction that I found in the literature. Printed commonplace books, these were thinkers would collect a bunch of quotes on, physics or the Bible or whatever, and they would put them together and then they would publish them and sell them to people. So you could get a good understanding of the topic from an expert who's done all the relevant readings. So those are called printed commonplace books. I call those treasury commonplace books because I'm not really like printing them. But it's like my treasury. These are my this is I've collected these. And then the manuscript one was exactly what I use. That's people manuscripting out a book or a paper or something, but blocking off the quotes and stringing them along how they're going to use them in their paper and then manuscripting them out. The difference is, I mean, they didn't have digital stuff to do this with. So now people just do this on a Word document, but I think, writing on hand and having it in a notebook is really helpful because when I'm writing a new one, I can thumb through my old papers, my old ideas in that one same notebook, and I oftentimes generate new ideas. So there's a lot for you. So general, specific, treasury, or manuscript. And then you can mix and match those and come up with 4 different types of commonplace book.
Yeah, nice. That's great. I mean, I've never thought of it as a distinct form of text. I have this book right next to me, Hellenistic Philosophers,
Mm,
by Anthony Long and David Sedley, and it's a collection of quotes by Stoics, Epicureans, and skeptics on a variety of topics. So there'll be a chapter on what the soul, and it'll just be a bunch of quotes about what the Stoics think about the soul.
yeah.
And you don't often think of this is probably the book I use the most after the primary, after actually going and reading Epictetus, Seneca, Marcus Aurelius, and you don't see that often, but just the value of somebody who is a world expert in something, putting together, okay, I've done the readings, I can actually tell which of these are valuable or not, and putting them in order for you, is incredibly, incredibly helpful. Obviously, you have to be careful because you're missing context, but that's when you're using it as a research term for somebody
Right.
just a research source for somebody who's just trying to get into it. That's fine too. But yeah, I never thought of that as a genre of writing before. I only have this one. I'm like, this is amazing, but apparently it's more well, I was gonna say more commonplace, but
Yeah.
it is, yeah, a style, which is really cool.
And so someone listening might go, "Well, what about an anthology? It just sounds like an anthology." Well, in an anthology, uh, these all have different definitions depending on who's using them and when. But I would think of an anthology as collecting, like it would be a collection of stories. So it's the whole thing is in there, and
Yeah,
an anthology will usually be multiple authors. So it's not the same author. That would be I forgot what they call that. It's just that that's a collection. There's another word for it, but an anthology is gonna be different authors and the complete work all paired together, whereas a commonplace is like what you just talked about. Here are excerpts that are relevant to this topic. Here's what all these thinkers thought about this. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. And it's great. It's so helpful. So tying that together, I'm just gonna try to take a run at it, and you let me know if I'm getting any of these wrong.
Yeah.
You've got your diary, which is your time bound. This is how I feel every day, non-judgmental. You have a journal, which is like what you think. You're attempting to synthesize how you feel about certain or what you think about certain things. You got a pocket notebook, which is what you carry around on the day to day. Or sorry, how does the pocket notebook, I guess, vary from the catch-all? The catch-all is what you carry around on the day to day and you put things in. Pocket notebook is just kind of is
No,
that different or
that's the same.
same thing? Yeah.
Well, I'm using that interchangeably. A pocket notebook is just a thing, right? It's
It's
just
the
like
physical medium and you can use it as a journal, a diary, or a
exactly.
catch-all.
I use my pocket notebook, the one I put in my
Yeah, yeah.
pocket as a catch-all. Yeah.
Great, got it. And then the catch-all is the thing that is that we were talking about that offloading, or I'm gonna come back to this, or I don't wanna
Mm.
have to think about this, so I'm gonna put it down and return to it. Then the 3 that seem to be a bit more focused, soliloquies, you're personifying one part of an argument to engage in kind of a conversation around it. Commonplace book, which is, a collection of quotes on a certain topic, and then a compendium, which is, as you said, almost like a field guide, a how-to, a systematic approach. Maybe what Epictetus is. Epictetus's handbook would be a compendium. Marcus Aurelius's meditation would be somewhere between a diary or a journal, depending on where we're going with that. Was that is that the framework?
Yeah, I think so. The the compendium doesn't necessarily have to be a how-to. It could just be, this is how you are doing this, right? So, like, think about, "Hey, I'm in the woods all the time. This isn't great because you need pictures for this," but it's just the abstracted out ideas. It's just the information. So it's a collection of information about a given topic.
Which doesn't
So
necessarily need to be information about what you should be doing. It can be
right,
any kind
right,
of information. Yeah, as you said,
right.
this is a type of turtle. Not that I have to
Yeah,
do anything about that, but there,
right,
there just
right.
is.
Right, so
And
you may, if you, let's say you read that book that you have that's the Hellenistic philosophers, and then instead of taking the quotes, you just take the information from there and you put that into your own
mm,
notebook. I would say that's a compendium. It ju
yeah,
you're
got it.
saying this is what they did say or whatever, but it's just the information. Yeah.
So for someone that resonated, someone listening that's resonated with this conversation, do you have any recommendations about like, hey, you should start here if you're looking at building up this practice? It's not like, hey, go and do all these things at the same time. That's quite a
Yeah.
bit. How do you think a practice should start? What recommendations would you have for somebody listening?
I would say everyone should probably keep a catch-all, especially if you struggle with anxiety. It's really helpful. It's really, really helpful just to put down your ideas. It's a way to be responsible. It's a way to respect your mind. I do take my ideas seriously. I'm going to write them down. So I think the catch-all can be super helpful if you have ADHD. It's a working memory. It's an external working memory. I won't say hard drive because it's not digital or whatever, but that's the function that it's playing. I think that's super helpful to people, especially if you struggle with ruminations in bed. Like, I think this is helpful. So that's universally applicable, I think. But then I'm going to say, if you've heard the different options, uh, do some self-examination and see what you need. I think that most of us can benefit from using one of these. If not, then that's great. That's fine. But if this sounds like a tool that could help you, I would go for that one and not the one that sounds the coolest to you. Maybe you think a commonplace book would be really cool because you can have all these great quotes from philosophers or something. But if it's going to be a burden for you to do that, and it's not exciting, then don't do it. If a diary sounds more helpful for you, then get over the fact that it's called a diary and just use it. It's okay. It's not, we always think like, oh, little girls do this. Like, no, like, lots of men have done this throughout history. And if a little girl does that, then good for her. That's awesome. Sometimes people will comment that on my things. I'm like, this is exactly like soliloquies. Someone said, this is exactly what little girls do. I'm like, wow, then they're advanced, man. That's
Yeah.
exactly what ancient
Maybe we
philosophers were
could learn
doing.
something. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Um, okay. So I think this is really great. I want to push back a bit.
Yeah.
Well, I'm just what I'm thinking. Do you think there's a risk of kind of over intellectualizing your life or a risk of kind of, walking around and being like 'cause I just made this argument about it being good for mindfulness, but do you ever have the opposite problem where, like, somebody's doing something, you're like, "Oh, I should write that down," instead of engaging, instead of making human connection, instead of focusing on them. Is the it does that ever happen? Have you experienced that? Do you think that's a problem or a concern?
I think it definitely can be a problem if you're more interested in information than the people that you're interacting with, and that will show up by you saying, "Hang on, I need to write this down. Shut up." I need to, you know what I mean? There's ways to do it that actually honors the person, right? They say something profound and you write it down. That's really good. That's a way to honor them. "Hey, can you hang on, or can you say that again? That was really profound. I would love to write that down."
Yeah.
Like that actually is a way to honor them. So it depends on what you're doing. Some of us really like information and we're information junkies, and it's like, hey, you need to like respect people, man. You need to treat them like people and not just information machines. So I think that's true. I think that can be a problem. There Another negative is sometimes when we offload our ideas, we have the sense of completion and we don't go back to work on them. So it feels like I'm already done with that idea because I wrote it down. No, that was the first step. You go back and do that. This is why I stopped using my phone to take notes because I still, dude, I still have 3 years of notes in here that I've never looked at. And I'm telling you right now, but I'm not going to go back later. I'm going to forget to go in there because when I see my phone, I see texts, I see emails, I see YouTube, I don't see thoughts here. But I have a dedicated thing. All I see here are my thoughts. That's all that it's for. And so it's not like super efficient because I'm not trying to be efficient. I'm trying to think well. And sometimes those 2 go together, but when they come apart, I'd rather think well than be super efficient. So it's maybe not as practical to have 2 things in my pocket than to have 1, but if that's what I need to do, then that's what I need to do to live well. Um, yeah, so don't be, more interested in information than in people. Sometimes you may have to hold that hold that thought in your mind, that's fine, we know how to do that, and write it down later. That's fine. Be respectful of people, and don't be so obsessed with information that you lose grip on what's going on around you.
Mhm. Yeah, like everything else, doing it in moderation, right? Anything can be done
Sure.
incorrectly
Yeah.
as long as you're cautious of not doing that. The other thing I was thinking of, just one last thought here. I was watching a podcast recently, and a psychiatrist was talking about how people are kind of losing the capacity for an internal dialogue
Mhm.
because there's so much constant stimulation. Like, you'll listen to a podcast, then you'll watch a YouTube video, and then you'll go on Instagram on your phone, that there's no kind of internal, they don't actually develop the ability, something like a soliloquy, for example, that's something you have to practice. A diary, that's something you have to practice. So, um, this isn't a criticism, but the thing that I think is really cool about this is, like, A, you have part of that practice is self-generation, like, a diary and a journal.
Yeah.
That is, you just have to sit down and you have to pull things out of yourself. But then there's other parts of this practice that is kind of like information, just like grabbing, retrieving, storing. But even that, as you said, with the mind body connection, through the process of writing it down, through the process of deciding where to put it, deciding how to put it into your journal, for example, it gets passed through the filter of you. Like, it takes part of your own identity in a way, and you participate in the idea.
Mm.
I assume you add to it, subtract to it, change it in a way. And I think that is like a great way of, because you don't want to be somebody who's skilled at trivia, right?
Yeah.
Trivia is not self transformation. The ability to pull out a quote out of your head or pull out your book and read a quote does not make you a good person. Um, like Epictetus talks about this. He criticizes the students who can quote Chrysippus, the third head of the Stoic school. He says, "Man, it's not like I don't care that you can sit here and you can quote Chrysippus to me. That's just not what it's about." So I think there's that risk, but I'm kind of answering my own question here, or kind of
Mhm.
defeating the straw man a bit. I think one of the benefits to this is that yeah. So if you only had a quote of books, maybe you could be kind of trivial with that and be shallow with it. But when you do a journal, you are synthesizing it with your own thoughts. When you do a soliloquy, you are participating in it and you're digesting it a bit.
100%. And I love that you caught that there's 2 categories. There's self-generation and then there's the input. That's exactly how I think about it. That's why I usually carry a Commonplace book, which is other people's thoughts that's coming in. Those are things I wanna ruminate on, make them part of me. And then there's the self-generation of the, catch-all, because I think those are the 2 categories. So I like to carry
Mm,
2 with me. You don't have to do that, but that's the way I like to do it. And then everything else fits in those categories. That's why the manuscript Commonplace book is a blend of the 2. It's
mhm.
here's the someone else's thought, and here's my thoughts on that. So, yeah, man, I love that. I have a pocket proverbs commonplace book. It's gold. It's a really shiny, gaudy gold color, and that's because the book of Proverbs says wisdom is more valuable than gold. And so I'm like, this is part of me proving that to myself. Look, remember that. Remember that it's great to be able to quote that. It's even better to live your life that way. That it's
Mhm.
better to get wisdom than to chase money. It's better to get wisdom than to sell yourself to an unwise person. It's better to do you really believe that? And so I have the collection of proverbs, and if I just memorized them, then that would be not good enough. I need to
Mm.
actually live those out because wisdom isn't just reflecting a gnomic statement. It's not just spitting that out. It's actually making that part of yourself so that you act wisely as well, even if you're not reciting the proverb. Though I think it's great if you can recite a proverb to someone in need. Someone comes to you and you've set yourself up as the wise person, not not in a way to be a jerk or arrogant, but people come to you and they're like, "Hey man, I need some advice." And you can pull something that's really wise and give that to them. That's like the best of scholarship. Like that's the best of the academy. Like I'm helping you with your life by giving you an inspirational quote or a right word at the right time. Like that a word fitly spoken is like, apples of gold in the setting of silver. That's a proverb, right? And
Nice.
that's I didn't have that memorized beforehand, but I've made that a part of me, and it just come you know what I mean? It comes out when
Yeah,
the cup is tipped.
that's great, and I mean, the thing that I love about that too is that there is something about it isn't trivia in that case. When a friend comes to you and says, "What should I do?" and you then take in the context of, "I understand my friend. I understand what they're going through. I understand our relationship and that power dynamic, and I also, have internalized, these ideas from Seneca, Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius, or, whoever your philosophers or, um, thinkers of choice are, you're combining all those things at the same time. You're not just being a Google search. It's
Yeah,
the right thing at the right time because
right.
you know something about them that the book wouldn't know. So you're providing, there's a value add by by matching that need with the solution, right?
Totally, totally. And this is something that a lot of philosophers get wrong, and you see it in kind of the analytic continental split. The wisdom tradition used to be part of philosophy and it split off and now the philosophers call them gurus and well, I'm not a guru and like no the best of the ancient philosophers knew when to give a syllogism and knew when to give an aphorism. So sometimes they would give an aphorism and you go chew on this, you go figure this out. Here's a riddle, here's a puzzle, here's a gnomic statement, here's a proverb, you go chew on that. And other times they would spell it out for them depending on who it was, depending on the situation, and depending on the intended goal. So if I want you to come to this conclusion yourself, I might give you an aphorism. If I want to help you see this, then I'm going to help you walk through it, dianoia. I'm going to help you reason your way to it the way that I see it, and we can argue in dialogue. But I
Mhm.
think that's like the best of the philosophers. They can do both. They can tell you a joke and they can give you an argument.
No, that's great. And anything that we didn't cover or any idea you'd like to bring up along these same lines that you think is worth people hearing about?
Yeah. Right now I'm working on uh okay, skill acquisition is really cool because it's really humbling. You start something new, a new skill, especially a new skill. You look like a fool doing it, and so it's really helpful. Something that I've just recently started is a nature log. It's probably it's probably is it a journal or a diary? It's probably a journal, but kind of a compendium. I don't know. It's hard to analyze, but it's a nature log. When I go out and I'm in the woods, or if I'm around a pond and I see an animal, I want to look that animal up. I want to mark the conditions. What kind of day was it? Blah, blah, blah. You may add how you're feeling and stuff, but I feel like this is a really helpful way to get in touch with nature and to remember the seasons. So I'm always like, man, last year was it this cold at this time? Wouldn't it be sweet if I had a journal from like when I was outside and I saw a black squirrel and here's the Latin name for a squirrel or something like that. Like I've looked up this stuff and I've collected it here and it's helping me stay in contact with my surroundings. It's helping me bloom where I'm planted. So that's something that was lacking in my life. I really love herpetology, frogs, turtles, ichthyology, fish, all that stuff. And, man, so often I'm just stuck in my office here reading books, which is cool, but I also wanna get back in touch with nature, and so I'm forcing myself to do that with this journal that when you have an empty journal, you wanna go fill it. So I wanna go back out into nature, and I started drawing. They look like little kid pictures because I haven't drawn since I was a little kid, so I'm very bad at it. It's really humbling, but I'm going to get better at it. I just will do that, and I will watch a YouTube video on botanic art and how to draw um, sticks and stuff and plants. So I think that's one that if people haven't resonated with any of the more heady type stuff, then keep a nature log. That would be really great.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a lovely idea to end on. I think the term you used was, I mean, I should have written it down. Something like being grounded in the world, because there's this, just the versatility to this I'm taking away is, yeah, there's the soliloquy, there's the going into yourself more, there's a self discovery and knowledge, but then there's this opportunity, yeah, to be more present with the world, and that's a beautiful idea. And I'll come back to that idea I mentioned at the start of just like taking thinking seriously, taking your mind seriously, thinking this is worth recording, writing down, and participating in the development of. Um, and this has given me a lot to chew on. So thank you very much for that.
Yeah, man, this is fun. I love talking with you, dude. It's fun, like a kindred spirit here from the opposite side, from the stoic side of things. And it's like, what would I be like if I were a stoic, dude? I'm seeing it. This is really cool. So I always love talking with you, man.
Yeah, it's great. No, I feel the same way. Maybe the same destination, just different angles. For those that were listening and were like, "Oh, this was a great conversation. Parker seems like the kind of guy I'd like to learn more from." What do you have going on? Where can they check you out?
Yeah, you can find lots of really great conversations, podcast conversations on my podcast, Parker's Pensies. I know it's Pensée, but I'm an American swine, so I pronounce it Pensy. There's a lot to that, but you can find that on YouTube or wherever your favorite podcatcher, and you'll find amazing thinkers like Michael Tremblay talking about Stoicism on there. I also have the big Mac Daddy is Park Notes. That's where I talk about all the journaling habits. That's the syntax of my philosophy and theology study. The semantics, the actual like content will you'll find that over on Parker's Pensies. And then I have a Substack called Parker's Ponderings, and that's a catch-all, I guess, for all of my ideas and stuff. That's where you can read my science fiction stories as well. So there's a lot.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks again, man.
Thanks for listening to Stoa Conversations. Please give us a rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify and share it with a friend. If you want to dive deeper still, search Stoa in the App Store or Play Store for a complete app with routines, meditations, and lessons designed to help people become more stoic. And I'd also like to thank Michael Levy for graciously letting us use his music. You can find more of his work at ancientlyre.com. And finally, please get in touch with us. Send a message to stoa@stoameditation.com if you ever have any feedback, questions, or recommendations. Until next time.